What's going on, y'all? Welcome into episode 10 of the Bubba Rose Show. We really appreciate you tuning in whenever and however you're listening. Be sure to like, follow, and subscribe on our Facebook page, YouTube channel, and whatever audio-only platform you're tuning in on, such as Google Podcasts, Spotify, and Anchor. On this edition of the program, you're going to hear from ESPN and AL.com's award-winning reporter, Lauren Sisler. Yes, we're certainly going to talk sports with Lauren later on in the conversation, but first, we talk about something that's much more important. You see, back in 2003, Lauren was early on in her collegiate gymnastics career at Rutgers when suddenly her world was turned upside down. Her parents were both battling addiction to prescription drugs, and this was something that Lauren was not aware of, and then tragically they died from overdoses within a 24-hour period. We'll discuss addiction from a variety of angles with the hope that individuals who hear this podcast will be better equipped to handle their own addictions or help someone they know who may be struggling with an addiction. Lauren also talks about the stigma that comes with addiction and how she overcame the negative emotions she was feeling toward her parents even after they were no longer here on earth. And now, let's go ahead and go to that conversation with Lauren Sisler. Very honored right now to be joined by ESPN sports reporter, also the SEC Network and AL.com. Welcome into the show, Lauren Sisler. Lauren, how are you this afternoon?
Hello, I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on this show. I appreciate it. I know we've been trying to line this up for a few weeks now, so it's good to finally get it in and talk a little football as spring football is almost here. Obviously, we got basketball and some other fun, I guess, personal projects going on.
Absolutely. We'll talk a variety of things over the next 40 to 45 minutes. But before we dive into the heart of your story, which is the primary reason I wanted to have you on, let's just tell our listeners and viewers, who is Lauren Sisler? I know you grew up in Roanoke, Virginia, southwest part of Virginia, about 45 minutes from Virginia Tech. So just tell folks who you are.
Yeah, so there you go. Obviously, growing up in Roanoke, Virginia, very, very long time ago. But yeah, I grew up in Roanoke, Virginia. I was a gymnast growing up, a wee little thing, training at Roanoke Academy of Gymnastics, and then had my sights set on being a collegiate gymnast. So I was able to earn a scholarship to compete at Rutgers University. And of course, Rutgers was never on my radar until I started sending out my recruiting tapes. And I do want to date myself because they were tapes. They were VHS, y'all. So much for Vimeo and YouTube. We didn't have that back then. So I had to do the old snail mail way of doing things. You know what that's like, right, Bubba?
Absolutely. I remember I played small college football, but I remember those days in the late 90s, sending out VHS tapes back before Huddle and the different, YouTube where you could just share a link.
Oh my gosh, it's totally different nowadays. But nevertheless, had my sights set on the college scholarship and was, fortunate enough to go compete at Rutgers and really loved my time there. And, it's great here being in Birmingham, Alabama. That's where I'm based at now. And it's kind of cool because, yes, I'm in SEC country. And of course, Rutgers was in the Big East back when I was there. And, obviously in more recent years transitioned to the Big Ten, but it's kind of nice to, I guess, in some ways sort of be impartial down here when I'm in Birmingham, Alabama, where you have Tuscaloosa about an hour one way and Auburn an hour and a half, hour and 45 minutes the other way. So people are always like, who do you root for? Who's your team? And obviously, if I'm wearing red, I make sure people know it's scarlet and not crimson. So it's kind of nice to not really have a dog in the fight, so to speak. To remain neutral, but obviously love covering SEC football. Been here since 2011 in Birmingham. Bounced around all over the place. Worked at WDBJ7 in Roanoke. Worked in Parkersburg, West Virginia, and then came here to Birmingham in 2011. Like I said, so never thought Alabama would become home for me, but obviously very thankful for it, and thankful for the people and just the family that I've surrounded myself down here, down in the deep South.
Talk about your desire and your passion to go into broadcasting.
Yeah. So, it's interesting. When I was growing up, I always loved sports. I knew I loved sports. I was around sports. My brother was a 3-sport athlete. My dad was usually on the sidelines coaching, volunteer coaching, whatever it may be. And of course, my mom always very involved, especially with my gymnastics. And we were the type of family that the TV was always on sports, college football, NFL. We were a big fan of the Washington, I should say. That was my team growing up. And then NASCAR was a big one. So you talked about Pulaski, Bubba. We used to go to the NRV Speedway quite a bit. My brother was actually on a pit crew there in Pulaski, Virginia, and he was with Paul Cundiff. It was Paul Cundiff, and it was fun to go out there and watch the races. So that's kind of how my love for racing, was sort of implemented into my early childhood. And obviously being here in Birmingham, Alabama, we got the beautiful Talladega. So, sports has always been a big part of my life and something I've always enjoyed, obviously as an athlete myself, but being a spectator. But what's crazy is I actually wanted to be a sports doctor. And it wasn't until I got to college, and I know we'll get into my story here in a little bit, but that I got, about halfway through my college career and realized like, I don't know that, medicine is for me, and, decided to take some time and reevaluate my direction and where I was headed in life. And, decided that, I love sports and I love connecting with people and I love storytelling. And so that's kind of what led me in this direction to be a sports reporter. And, been very fortunate to cover a lot of great teams, but even more importantly, a lot of great stories that I believe make sports more than just a game.
You talk about being a Scarlet Knight prior to settling on Rutgers. What other schools were you considering?
Yeah, so actually sent my recruiting tape out and had some conversations with NC State was one of them, UNC, and West Virginia was another one, and then Air Force Academy. So those were kind of the higher on the the totem pole, if you will, and ones that I was making heavy consideration for. But what's interesting, obviously, in the state of Virginia, there aren't many schools that actually have gymnastics. And so that was, something that weighed into it, because a lot of people are like, you live, right around the corner from Blacksburg, right around the corner from Virginia Tech. Why didn't you go there? And I said, well, they don't have a gymnastics team. And it's kind of crazy because even here in the SEC, you would think that there would be more women's gymnastics team. And there's actually only 8 out of the 14 schools that, are here in the SEC. So, not every school has gymnastics. And, even the sport of gymnastics, when I was at Rutgers, was the East Atlantic Gymnastics League. So we were even positioned differently because there was no such thing as Big East gymnastics. And so things were different. But of course, now in the Big Ten, things have changed quite a bit. And obviously, it's been great to see, the Rutgers gymnastics program and football and, a lot of the other sports really thrive in the new league that they're in.
Not to get off on a tangent, but just off the top of your head, do you know how many Division I gymnastics programs are there around the country?
Oh my goodness. Honestly, I could not tell you the answer to that, but to put things into perspective for people about gymnastics, and I don't know how accurate this number is right now to date, but a few years ago, I had learned that in the world of gymnastics, so collegiate gymnastics is essentially equivalent to like level 10. And so I was actually, I achieved level 10 at a very young age. I was 10 years old when I actually started competing at level 10. My form was awful. I had a long way to go, but I was fearless. So I was throwing skills, chucking skills left and right. My coach was like, let's just do it. So, I started level 10 at a very young age, and then obviously developed and grew my skill set. Obviously my grace and my form and my, execution improved throughout the years. So in gymnastics, you obviously have the various levels, the competitive levels, and they've all changed since I was there. I started competing at level 5, and then obviously level 10 was the transition into college. But what's interesting is the elite level, which is the Olympic level, there are only about 70 on average, 70 elite level gymnasts in the entire country. Think about that. 70 elite level gymnasts in the entire country. That, my friends, is crazy. So I don't know what that number is right now, but that was a few years ago that I had learned that. So there's such a small percentage of gymnasts that are ever able to achieve that very top level. So, if you you put that to the Olympic level, and I realized that obviously, those numbers are obviously smaller, the amount of athletes that actually make it to the Olympics. But if you compare it to pro sports, because there is no such thing as pro gymnastics, the amount, the ability, I guess the ability to be able to achieve that top tier in gymnastics is extremely, extremely difficult and very rare. And so, being in the sport of gymnastics, obviously very unique. I definitely miss it. And I always joke with people, I say it kind of stinks because there's no such thing as like going out up in the backyard and playing a pickup game of gymnastics. Like that doesn't exist. So every once in a while you might find me at the trampoline park, all taped up, bandaged up with all my, ankle braces on, ready to rumble. But other than that, my body is definitely in retirement mode, if you will.
Yeah, so my sister, she's about your age. They're in her mid 30s as well, and about 3.5 years younger than me. But I know growing up in the mid 90s, watching gymnastics in the Olympics and so forth, she was more of a competitive cheerleader.
Gymnastics has always been a fun spectator sport, and of course it's changed because that perfect 10-0 doesn't exist at the elite level now. So of course at the college level it still does, but at the elite level it doesn't. So when you watch the phenomenal Simone Biles, your jaw just hits the ground because what she's able to accomplish and achieve, and literally there's no ceiling. Like she just keeps doing crazy things, miraculous things that I'm like, she is absolutely extraordinary. If you put her into that category of, make that argument, who's the Michael Jordan of gymnastics or the Tiger Woods of golf or whatever, or the Tiger Woods of gymnastics, I should say, she by far would fall into that category, but it's crazy to me because it's never ending. Like she just keeps achieving more and more and more and more. And the gap is so wide. Like there's nobody anywhere close to her.
So just talk about the life of a gymnast from the standpoint, of dieting and being disciplined and all the hours of training and so on.
Well, I would say, I don't want to say that I had it easy, but I would say where I competed at Roanoke Academy, things were a little different in that, I was one of the few gymnasts that was actually at that higher level, at least early in my career. And so, as far as the dieting and, maintaining a certain physique, I felt like it wasn't as, there wasn't as much pressure surrounding that in our gym as maybe you've heard in other stories, and especially some of the negative headlines that you've heard in recent years. I was very fortunate to have a coach that, she pushed me hard, but as long as I was performing well in gym, there was never, any situations where it's like, hey, you can't have that piece of pizza, because that was sort of what worked for me. I'm one of those types that when it comes to competition and when it comes to, being pushed, my coach could always lay into me. My coach could always, some of that tough love would always get me very motivated. And so I was never really pampered. So that always was something that was beneficial for me. But then I remember when I would have a good day at practice, my mom would always take me up to the local, the general store to get me some self-serve ice cream, or TCBY was always my thing. So, ice cream was definitely very much a big part of my diet when I was growing up. So I didn't really have to deal with a lot of some of the things that you hear, like I said, with the very strenuous eating regimens that a lot of the gymnasts are on or have been on. And, I think nutrition is certainly a big part of it. As you know, Bubba, like in the sports world, nutrition is a very large percentage of productivity, right? And I think that's something that you don't necessarily understand or maybe focus on until you get a little bit later in your career. And so that was something that really took shape, especially when I did go off to college, because we did have nutritionists, we did have, strength trainers. We had people that were there to kind of guide us, because we didn't do a lot of strength training in gymnastics until we got to college. Most of it was resistance training. Most of it was, I could whoop your butt in doing some pull-ups. Let me tell you that. But when it comes to squatting however many pounds, not so much. But with that being said, gymnastics is a very rigorous sport, but like most sports, gymnastics is very much mental just as much as it is physical, and, of course, emotional. And, the nutrition is certainly a big part of it.
Absolutely. You bring up TCBY, and also another one I remember from my childhood is Zax. I don't know how widespread that was.
Zax? No, we didn't have Zax. Of course, Dairy Queen's always a big one. Yeah. TCBY, though, is still my favorite. We have a lot of those soft serve places here in Birmingham, like Sweet Frog and Yogurt Mountain, but TCBY to me still tastes the best. And it's pretty much the same. I get the parfait, cookie dough on the bottom, Butterfinger or Reese cup in the middle, rainbow sprinkles on top, and then I get chocolate vanilla swirl ice cream. So, I'm a candy lover. I love my sweets. So most people are just, they always joke with me about that. I'm a sweets lover, and I also love sauce. So my nickname, my last name's Sisler, but my nickname has become Sauceler because normally I'll go somewhere to, a chicken finger restaurant or wherever it may be. And I've literally got like 5 or 6 sauces lined up in front of me, and I'm just dunk, 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 dunk. So that's kind of the ongoing joke in my world.
Kind of shifting gears a little bit and take us back there in the early 2000s at Rutgers, and just talk about your parents and just the type of parents they were, and then we'll dive into everything that transpired in 2003.
Yeah. So, as you mentioned, we talked about it growing up in Roanoke, Virginia. I had an older brother, and, my parents were very supportive parents. And, it was always great to kind of have them on the sidelines there cheering us on, very involved in our athletics, academics. My parents always said, focus on your schoolwork, focus on gymnastics, we'll take care of the rest. And, I always think, I'm so fortunate to have had parents that were so supportive, through the good and the bad. And, was my family perfect? Absolutely not. But in my mind, growing up, I felt like I was very fortunate to have parents that were very involved in pretty much our everyday lives and really kind of, helped us map out that road to success, my brother and I. And so, we were a tight knit family. Of course, like I said, always on the go, but, there was the riding our bikes around the neighborhood, going up to the local, swimming club and, doing double fronts off the diving board. And, of course, being a show off, like that's just the way it goes when you're a little kid. Right. But family dinners, always enjoyed time around the dinner table. My mom always had a nice hot meal on the table. Certainly miss those quite a bit. But yeah, so, just grew up in, what I felt like was a very loving home, and, was very fortunate to have, my parents there to support my brother and I, to, be there for us and to really lift us up in our successes and when we were down. And, it was a pretty proud day for my parents when I signed my letter of intent to go to Rutgers, because I had worked so hard for that scholarship and endured a lot of injuries, endured a lot of blood, sweat, and tears, a lot of pain to get to where I was. And I also knew that my parents had also invested so much time and so much money into the sport of gymnastics. For those of you who might have children that might be thinking about going into gymnastics, it's not a cheap sport. Let's just put it that way. So a lot of people, kind of joke about having to take out a second mortgage on the house to be able to afford the tuition and whatnot that goes into it. And of course, the leotards and the grips and obviously the traveling and everything else. But, it was a proud day when I signed that letter of intent. And I knew that I had the opportunity to kind of give back to my parents after they had provided so much for me in that process. And so, when I unpacked that last box and we hugged goodbye my freshman year in college, it was a pretty special moment. And, I can still see the look on my parents' faces. We said our goodbyes and they walked out the door, and, they were very proud.
So, your parents, were there any precursors before we go any further? I mean, were there any precursors to what we're about to talk about in terms of the addiction? Did you know anything or it totally blindsided you?
Yeah, well, I think that the tough part about it is hindsight's always 2020. So leading up to my second semester, I had talked to my parents on the phone, and a week before my parents had passed away, I'd gotten a phone call from my mom, and she was very upset and angry and kind of, unsettled about things financially, and said, hey, you might not be able to go to school next year. We're not going to be able to afford to send you there. Because despite being on scholarship, I still had to pay for my housing and my books and those sort of things. And, it was a bit of an alarming call, just because my mom was always so laid back and, usually had a smile on her face, and she was very distressed, very upset, and, very angry. And I didn't really think much of it, but I was like, I was sad, I was upset. And then my dad later called me and said, hey, don't worry about it. Your mom just ran out of her medication. Like, it's going to be okay. We're going to get her medication. She's just really irritable. We're going to figure out the finances. Don't worry about it. So I just kind of forgot about it and said, all right. So a week goes by. I pick up the phone like I always did, talk to my parents on the phone before, set my alarm clock, went to bed. We said our I love yous, and everything seemed fine. Everything seemed back to normal. My mom seemed great. She seemed like she was in good spirits. My dad seemed fine. And he had just celebrated his 52nd birthday, and, things seemed okay. And unfortunately, they weren't okay. I woke up to a phone call from my father just after 3 o'clock to let me know that my mom had died. And of course, I was shocked because I had just talked to them and thought everything was okay. It's the middle of the night. What happened to mom? And he couldn't give me an explanation. He said, Lauren, get on the next plane you can. I'll be at the airport to pick you up. And unfortunately, he never did show up that day to pick me up at the airport. Instead, it was my Uncle Mike and my cousin Justin who had to share the bad news that my dad too had passed away. So not only did I lose my mom, but within a few hours, my father too passed away, and both of them passed away from prescription drug overdoses, as you alluded to there with the addiction. And, it was something that was very unexpected. My parents, they were experiencing some chronic pain. My mom had degenerative disc disease. My father had chronic back pain, and they were both suffering from some depression and anxiety. They were going to a pain management doctor in Roanoke. And, you go to a doctor because you're in pain. They prescribe drugs because you're in pain. You take the drugs, it makes you feel good, at least for a small amount of time. But then eventually it gets to a point where you start to build up a tolerance. And my parents had built up a tolerance to their prescription drugs. And when they started out with one thing, it led to needing more and more and more and more. But all this was happening really behind closed doors. So something I was not privy to, something that I did not see every day. My parents did a great job of kind of keeping it under wraps, keeping it hidden from my brother and I, because I think that maybe there was some level of shame that they felt in all of that. So yeah, both of my parents, unfortunately, overdosed on the prescription drug fentanyl. My mom had been prescribed fentanyl, my father Oxycontin, but they were at this point kind of so deep into their substance use disorder that they really were just trying to stay above water. And so whatever it took to help them with, their pain, but also their addiction pain. And, we later found out through an investigation, and obviously with time and just, pointing to different things, that my parents, had ultimately taken that drug after having put it in the freezer and had overdosed on it. And again, it just was very unexpected. And, I think that we as a society grow up with a vision of what an addict is. So we put a label on addicts. And, unfortunately, that term addict comes with a lot of negative connotations. And, people think of an addict as someone that's homeless, someone that's uneducated, someone that, doesn't have a job, isn't employed. And my parents were none of those things. My parents provided for my brother and I. My dad had a full-time job at the VA Medical Center as a biomedical technician. My mom was working part-time, but obviously dealing with her chronic pain. She was on disability, so she wasn't able to work full-time, but it never seemed like it was an issue, and it certainly never seemed like it was terminal. And so, my parents for about a 3-year period have been going to this pain management doctor, and it was certainly a progression, but again, a progression that really was masked so well, because I think that my parents were, much like society puts labels on addiction, my parents were afraid of what those labels would do and how they would be judged. And, ultimately they were, I guess, silenced and unable to really cry out for help, I think, because of that shame that they might have felt. Were never able to get the help that they needed before they passed away.
You've talked about the variety of emotions that you felt, a couple different angles that I wanted to address the story from. You've talked about the denial and, not knowing the truth. And you certainly there for a long time didn't want to share the truth, what you did know, to be facts, with other people because of the shame that you've referenced here in the last couple minutes. So just talk about going through that process. And I know it took about the better part of a decade.
Yeah. A decade, which thinking about it, will be coming up on the 18-year anniversary of my parents' death. And I think about that because I was 18 when they passed away. So we're actually coming up on 18 years in which it's just hard for me to fathom that I've been on this earth living my life almost as long with them as I did without them. So that's kind of hard to process at times. And you talk about the shame factor, and a lot of that shame is inherent, and it's kind of built into how we're raised, how we're perceived, how life is perceived, how society is perceived. And of course, now, with social media and with media in general, and just how we as a society view things, through other people's lenses. And it creates this manifestation of what we think is right and wrong and how we view things. And I think that for me, there was that hurt and there was that anger, and how could my parents leave me and my brother so soon? How could this happen? How could this happen without us knowing? Why did my life with them get cut so short? And I just felt like I was robbed. So there was the anger. Well, first of all, there was the shock, and then there was the anger, and then there was just the like, what in the world happened? Like, what just happened? Like, I don't understand how this could happen to my parents, two people that loved and were loved by so many, and how could this happen right in front of us without us even knowing? And so for so many years, I ran from reality, and it was to the point where I would sugarcoat the story, because I thought that if I sugarcoated the story and people didn't know how my parents actually died, then I didn't actually have to tell the truth. And I told this story over and over again, that so much so that it got to the point where I actually started to believe it. So I was running away from reality, running away from the truth of what happened to them, because I was so afraid that they would be judged for how they died. I could never use the word overdose and addiction in the same sentence with both my parents, because I felt their legacy was bound in my hands. I felt it was up to me to preserve their legacy, but also their legacy was a reflection of me as their child. And so even as I started to, I guess, acknowledge how my parents died and said, okay, they died of addiction, they died of overdoses, but like, let's not talk about it. I would just kind of push it aside and not really acknowledge it. And, I think that by me running further away from the truth allowed me to sort of dodge the ultimate, emotion that came with the reality of things. And then as I started to accept how they passed away, I was still fearful of sharing it with people, because I was thinking, as I'm entering into the work world, entering into the broadcasting industry, where my job and what I do for a living becomes very public to people. You do a Google search and it's the first thing that pops up. And, now more so because I'm speaking out about it. But my fear was that maybe I would be overlooked for gymnastics awards, or maybe I would be overlooked for a job working in television because of my history, because of my past, because of my connection to my parents, who both died from drug overdoses. And so that was probably the hardest thing to overcome, that fear of shame and that fear of judgment, because I was just so afraid that people might overlook me and think, hey, you know what? Maybe she's not qualified. Where does she come from? Because there's just this negative stigma that comes from it, where people they just can't process that sometimes that an addict can be a good person, and that an addict is a disease, it's an illness. And that's where we really have to step up to the plate and try to normalize it and show people that just like cancer, just like diabetes, just like Alzheimer's, just like all the other various diseases and illnesses that are out there that require medical treatment, so does addiction. And if we can normalize it and help people to see that, I think that people will have a better chance at getting the help they need. There is hope in recovery. So we've got to give people hope and let them know that there are success stories. There are tremendous success stories out there, and you can beat this thing. It's going to be a fight, and it's going to be a fight for your life, but you can beat it. But then also preventing it. You work in the school system, that getting to these kids at an early age is so important, and especially our athletic community, where injuries happen, and I got to do what I can to get back out on the field and compete. What am I going to do? I got to take this. So my knee's killing me, but I want to compete. I want to go out there and play football. I want to go play baseball. I want to do gymnastics, whatever it is. But we have to be our own advocates. We have to advocate for ourselves and remember, like, we've got one body, here, and that we do not regenerate. So, if you decide to go down that road, whether it's because of an injury or recreationally, because, hey, I can do this thing and it feels good for now, but it's all temporary, y'all. And so that's what I tried to reiterate to people. There is hope in recovery, but also there's the prevention element that we need to get in front of with our students, our communities, and to show people that this thing is serious. And unfortunately, it is attacking us in so many ways right now, especially following this pandemic, that we're in the midst of, because people are facing so many challenges, whether it's, financially, emotionally, don't know if they're going to have a job tomorrow, economically. There's so many challenges that we're being faced with, and isolation has been such a big, key component to addiction, and people have felt isolated and nowhere to turn. So, my hope is that we can continue to, I got a puppy running around here, by the way. My hope is that we can, continue to bring light to it and to destigmatize addiction and remind people that it is an illness and that there is help and there is hope out there for them.
Another tremendous story, kind of tying it in with your story. It's one I'm sure you're familiar with, especially, with your background in athletics. And Damon West, Damon West and the Coffee Bean, obviously co-authored that book with John Gordon. But I had Damon West on a Zoom, since you brought up my students in middle school. I had Damon West Zoom with my students back in mid-November, which was an awesome experience. And there was one of my students who both of their parents were battling addiction. And so she and Damon West connected immediately, and he was talking about AA, and my student was talking about NA.
That's awesome. And those conversations are so important, even from such an early age. Just looking back at even when I was in middle school, I was so, engrossed and invested in gymnastics that I, just kind of tunnel vision, right? But there were so many opportunities, especially in the wake of tragedy and hardship, that I could have gone down that path. And, I was just thankful that I made the decision early on, even long before I really knew my parents had a problem, that I wasn't going to do drugs and I wasn't going to drink. And still to this day, I'm 36 years old and still do not drink. And I'm so thankful for it, because I do feel that, we do in life fill voids. And it's not just with drinking or drugs, alcohol, whatever, it's food. I love some food, don't get me wrong. But everything in moderation. And I think it's so important to, use the opportunity as teachers, as administrators, whoever's listening to this right now, like, you have a job to help these kids, mom and dad or their caretakers at home, get to spend however many hours with them, but then they come to school, they come to athletics, they're involved in their activities. You have an opportunity to continue to, share with them and be a role model for them, and really just be that person that can listen and that can help them through difficult times and guide them and tell them and show them that there are other alternatives, and that, there's so many great risks out there, and we're up against so many things, especially with social media. I think that's probably been the biggest changeover that I've seen, since I was in school. Look, we talked about it, VHS. There was no such thing as Facebook when VHS was like a big thing, right? So, Facebook didn't exist until I guess I was a sophomore or junior in college. And, social media has certainly taken its toll, and there's so many great things that can come from social media, some positive things, some communication, obviously, being connected, staying connected, but there's also that lack of reality, and that sometimes people are seeing something from a different lens, and really it's not reality. And, they're just seeing a small millisecond of someone's life, but they're not seeing everything else that's going on. And so their view of what perfection is skewed. And, I think that's where we really have to teach our youth, is that this is reality. And we got to face reality head on, and we got to get in front of issues that could potentially rear its ugly head when we get down the road, because life is going to throw challenges at us. There's just no doubt in my mind. There is no doubt that life is going to throw challenges your way, and you just got to be ready to stand up and, take the hit, and, try your best to continue moving forward, no matter what.
A minute ago, you talked about support systems and people helping you through tough times, be it family members, friends. When you were going through that progression, from shame and so forth, to spreading the word of hope, and telling people that it doesn't have to be that way. They can find help and so on. And who were some of those individuals that were so impactful in your life?
Well, first and foremost, having my aunt and uncle there was, I don't know what I would do without them. I call her my auntie Linda, and my uncle Mike. My auntie Linda is my mom's older sister, and I was just so fortunate to have her, there for me, because I was 18 when my parents passed away. So in terms of needing a legal guardian, I was old enough, but I was still a kid. I didn't even know how to write a check when my parents passed away. So they were really very instrumental in kind of helping me redefine that pathway to success. Still a huge part of my life. When I go home to Virginia to visit family, that's where I go, to Salem, Virginia, right outside of Roanoke. And, love spending time with them, sharing so many wonderful things with them. And just so fortunate to have that support system. And then from there, obviously so many friends and family members. And, I've got multiple sets of parents here in Birmingham, my Birmingham parents, so many people that have guided me. But one thing I'll say, and this is probably, kind of advice to others, advice to mentors and admin and staff members and teachers and coaches and whomever's listening to this. When I was at Rutgers, so 2 weeks after laying both of my parents to rest, I went back to Rutgers, and basically my aunt and uncle said, Lauren, you've got to go back to school. You have a commitment to yourself, your university, your teammates, and yourself. And this is what your parents would want for you. So 2 weeks after laying them to rest, I went back to school, and obviously it was a roller coaster ride. It was a struggle. I struggled big time. I mean, I was an AB honor roll student. I was making C's and D's. I'd never seen an F on a paper in my life. And I'm like, what in the world is going on? Like, I just felt myself suffocating. I was drowning. I was like doggy paddling. I was trying to get to the surface. And, things were crumbling right out from under me. And, for a long time, it was almost like I felt sorry for myself. For a long time, I was like, you know what? Like, this thing happened, and nobody's really going to fault me if I don't succeed. If I just kind of get by the best that I can, nobody's going to fault me for it. But what's so amazing about it, I kind of treaded water in my sorrows for about a year and a half. And finally, my coaches and my teammates and really everyone around me just said, Lauren, like, you have got to pick yourself back up and keep moving forward. We love you. We want to help you succeed. We are going to give you resources. We are going to push you harder than you've ever been pushed, because we know you can succeed. We know you can be successful. We know that you can get through this and overcome this and be a tremendous role model for other people. But you've got to pick yourself back up and be willing to take that first step. And so all that to say, I think the tough love aspect of it was so important for me, because it pretty much never gave me the choice to give up. But also, I wasn't able to put cruise control on and just sort of like coast by. I really had to truly pick myself up, and they weren't going to accept a 2.3 GPA because, oh, by the way, a 2.3 GPA was going to bring the entire team down. Not to mention, you gotta maintain a standard to be able to remain a collegiate athlete. So I lose my scholarship, then I lose, my ability to get an education. I might as well pack it up and go back home. So I think that was really important for me. And I would say that those are a lot of people in my life that really kept my head above water and encouraged me in some of my darkest of days, and reminded me that, like, hey, you're still here. You have to be in control of your life, and we're going to help you. We're going to give you resources, but you got to take that first step. And so that was really important for me.
Like I mentioned before we started recording, I was familiar with who you were from being on ESPN, the SEC network, and so forth, but I was not familiar with your story. But in preparation for this interview, once I found out about your story, I couldn't wait to watch the documentary, and certainly didn't have dry eyes watching that. As Coach Ruff, former East Carolina head coach, said back in the day, my eyeballs were sweating. But beyond the shadows, my family's journey through addiction. Go ahead and talk about that excellent 20-minute documentary.
Yeah, it was a short documentary. We actually shot and began filming it a couple years ago. Went back home to my hometown of Virginia. Went back to Amelia County, where my parents are laid to rest, and started kind of piecing together my story. The footnotes version, 20 minutes, will get you a little bit of the story, but really kind of paints a picture and kind of helps people to see, you know, this family that seems very normal, you know, was dealing with this very dark thing. And, you know, the goal of having that documentary was just to help people to see that this goes on every day. This impacts so many people that you love the most, and people that are sitting there right in front of you without even knowing. And, you know, my parents fought this concealed battle with addiction for many years. And, you know, the hope and goal of this documentary was to share my story, to really bring light to addiction, to destigmatize it, to help people know that they're not alone in this, that it's okay to talk about it. It's okay to get help. It's okay to ask for help and to find help. And, you know, to really have that support system, not only for the addict themselves, but the family members, the people that are left suffering and struggling day in and day out. You know, it's still a struggle, you know, having to deal with, you know, just the emotions of my parents not being here. And, you know, I just got married in May, and my dad was not here to walk me down the aisle. And that's hard. It's not easy. When you feel like you've been robbed of so many things, you know, but again, that's life. And that's, you know, we're going to lose people in our lives, but, you know, just wishing I had known more and been educated about addiction and had a better understanding of it. You know, I look back and say, you know, maybe I could have done something differently, but there's always a maybe. But guess what? I know that I can do something to help somebody moving forward. There is no maybe there. I know that by sharing my story, it can help one person, even if it's just one person, you know, to kind of undo those shackles of shame and say, you know what, I've got a problem. I need help. I want to fix this. I want to get my life on track. I want to have a better quality of life, not only for myself, my family, my kids, whomever it may be. And I just want people to know they're worth it. You know, addiction will take you to some dark places. It will try to attack you, and it will try to drown you. And, you know, I just want people to know they're worth it, that they're worth the best quality of life they can have. And, you know, it just takes asking for help.
A different situation, but a quote you just made reminded me of this. Keith LeClaire, who's a legendary baseball coach at Western Carolina, his alma mater in East Carolina, and he battled Lou Gehrig's disease, ALS. And Coach LeClaire said that all the suffering he went through for about 5 to 6 years with that disease, if he could help one person through his testimony and penning a book with his eye gaze machine, then it was worth everything that he and his family went through.
That's amazing. Absolutely. You know, I think that's the beauty of where we're at. We talk about sports and the opportunity to be a storyteller. I got into sports thinking like, oh, cool, I'm covering national championships and I'm out here talking to these athletes and these coaches and people that are at the absolute top of their game. But what I later came to realize is that it's about the stories, and that's stories that are woven into the fabric of sports. And such a beautiful thing. There's good stories, there's sad stories, there's triumphant stories, there's wins and losses within those stories. And, you know, I think that's what I'm so blessed for, is to be a voice for others. And it really was a vision that was so blurred because I couldn't even share my own story. I was afraid to share my story. And so as people started coming to me saying, hey, Lauren, you know, I've got this great story. I'm telling these stories, but I'm like not telling my own story. Something doesn't add up there. And so, you know, that's kind of when the light went off, and I realized that if I'm going to be a professional storyteller, I got to learn how to tell my own story. And that, you know, that has definitely, you know, opened my eyes to a different side of things and has made me fall in love with my job that much more.
Before we shift over and talk a few sports stories, one more question I had for you. I know you had an excellent show with Jim Dunaway and Dr. Stephen Taylor from the NBA, talking about the mental health effects, you know, going through the pandemic that we've gone through the last 11 and a half months. So just talk about that and tell listeners where they can find it.
Yeah, definitely. I appreciate that. So, you can go to laurensisler.com/sidelines or laurensisler.com, and it'll click you through where you'll find the 20-minute documentary, which is also on YouTube, and it's click there. And then underneath that, you'll also see the panel discussion with my good friend, Jim Dunaway. He's the host of the Docs Roundtable here in Alabama. He has a statewide show that's always fun to watch, but he was kind of with me in my early beginning phases of my career here in Alabama, and a great mentor to me. And then Dr. Stephen Taylor, as you mentioned, he's the medical director of the NBA and NBPA's player assistant program, or NBPA, I'm sorry, player assistant program, and also with Pathway Healthcare System here. And he really shed some light from a medical standpoint of why addiction is an illness and why it requires medical attention and how it can impact us in so many different ways. So that was sort of the rollout that we had on February 1st. We premiered my documentary and then did the panel discussion, and we are continuing that. We're going to make our way into some different communities and continue to provide some content and some different discussions around the topic of addiction and mental health as we continue moving forward. So more updates to come, of course, on my website, and then of course social media at Lauren Sisler. So would love to update people, and would love to hear from you if you have stories, questions, comments, whatever it is. I'd love to hear from you all, and always love to hear the feedback, and just connect with people, because we all share some common thread, and that means we all have a story. And so I'd love to hear from people and connect with you. And I appreciate you watching and the opportunity to share that.
Now, some of those sports stories that you love to cover and talk about. You talk about being in the state of Alabama. Gus Malzahn, Auburn decided to part ways with him, obviously, back in December. And then you had UCF in the American Athletic Conference bringing Gus on after they hired Terry Mohajir as their AD, following their previous AD, Danny White, and then obviously football coach Josh Heupel going up to Knoxville and UT. But I know when I was on your YouTube channel surfing different videos, I saw you playing ping pong with Gus Malzahn. So just talk about your the friendship you were able to develop with Gus, and your thoughts on UCF bringing in Gus Malzahn.
Okay, first of all, playing ping pong, Gus Malzahn will remind everyone that he smoked me, because he did. I did not have very much success playing ping pong. But yeah, I had the opportunity to meet with him. We do this thing at AL.com, a series that we call What Drives You. And it's something we've done with various coaches and athletes, and, different people kind of in the sports world, especially here in the SEC and down South, in the state of Alabama. And so had the opportunity to go to his house and kind of get to know him, off the football field. So we played ping pong, we played some arcade games. He loves Galaga, and he smoked me in that too. I mean, it wasn't a 2-player game, but essentially I got wrecked pretty early. We played basketball. So you can find that video on my YouTube channel. If you just Google like Lauren Sisler, Gus Malzahn, I'm sure you'll be able to find it. But also he took me fishing. We had to omit that, but that's on my Instagram account. So he gave me some pointers on how to fish. But really developed a great relationship with he and his wife, Christy. That's the one thing that I do love about, our industry, is getting to meet people, getting to know people, obviously getting to tell stories, but it's more than just a game, right? As I mentioned before. And, you develop these relationships with people and realize they're just people just like us, right? They coach for a living, and they put in probably way more hours than I could ever dream of putting into one specific thing, working their butts off. But it's a lifestyle, certainly. But just getting to know the people that surround the sport is always wonderful. And, it's hard. It's sad when you have to say goodbye and you have to turn the page to a new chapter, but thrilled for Gus Malzahn to get the job at UCF, thrilled for him to transition. I think a lot of people, even including myself, okay, what's going to be next for him? What's he going to do? Is he going to sit out a year? Is he going to do the media circuit like a lot of coaches do starting out? But, I had a gut instinct that he was going to get right back into coaching very quickly. That's just Gus Malzahn. I think that he is someone that loves, loves coaching, and that's that's his safe place. That's his safe haven. That is his happy place. And, I think that job at UCF is a great one for him. I think that he can have a lot of success there. And I've kind of joked with people. I said, who doesn't want to be in Florida where it's warm, where the weather's nice? And oh, by the way, you get season tickets to all the parks, Disney and Universal. He's got some adorable grandkids. So I'm sure he'll, in the off season, hopefully have a chance to take them there to enjoy Disney and whatnot. But yeah, I think it's a great fit for him. I think he can do a lot of phenomenal things. And, sometimes, expectations can be high, and the expectations were very high at Auburn. And I think at times, obviously, he exceeded those expectations. But, there comes a point where, you might not achieve those expectations, and, the stress and the pressure and everything that goes along with it. I think this is a good landing spot. I think that he can do what he does best. As the offensive genius that he is, and create a wonderful culture down there. And it'll be fun to watch.
Yeah, I certainly think it'll be a lot of fun to watch. And, he certainly knows the capability, potential, I should say, of UCF, because he lost to UCF during his time at Auburn in the Peach Bowl.
Yeah, that's very true. Yep.
But as soon as UCF made the hire of Terry Mohajir as AD, from Arkansas State, even though I know he had not hired Gus Malzahn, but they did have some time together there. And and oddly enough, Terry Mohajir had hired Brian Harsin, who's now the head Auburn coach. And so things went full circle in a sense. But, with Gus Malzahn, as soon as Terry Mohajir got that job in Orlando, his connection to Gus Malzahn, I said, I really, really think that he'll be your next UCF head coach.
Yeah, that's you predicted wisely. I think there's definitely a strong correlation there. And obviously there was even questions about Gus possibly going back to Arkansas, taking the Arkansas job before Sam Pittman took that job. So again, I think it's a great landing spot. I'm excited to see how things go. And of course, you never know, UCF being able to compete, and, as the discussions of playoff expanding at some point in time. Don't know that it'll happen soon. We keep being told that it's not going to happen soon, but hey, you never know. But I think he can definitely take that program to new heights, and it'll be fun to watch for sure.
Before we shift over and talk some college hoops very quickly, I know you've interviewed Nick Saban probably multiple times. So just talk about that experience, from afar. You see interviews he does going off the field at halftime, especially. And, when he's very, very animated, and he's such a competitor, the epitome of a competitor. So just talk about what that's like to interview Coach Saban, and have you ever interviewed him in that setting, post first half, going off at halftime?
Oh yeah, that is yes, and yes. Always interesting, to kind of to be in that situation. Coach Saban obviously comes off as a very intimidating guy, but certainly as long as you're prepared and you build that relationship. And I was very fortunate being here since 2011 to build that relationship with him several years into my tenure here in Birmingham, Alabama. I was granted the opportunity to do a one-on-one interview with him when I worked at the local CBS affiliate, and things kind of blossomed from there, and was able to produce a video with him and Charles Barkley not too long after, in 2016, when I moved and transitioned over to AL.com. So another video, if you Google search Charles Barkley, Nick Saban interview, pretty good stuff. So, just having the opportunity to kind of pick his brain and get to know him. And I've done his radio show a few times where things are a little bit more relaxed, and maybe get to ask him some off the cuff questions, not so much the X's and O's. So I always enjoy that. But, Nick Saban is a guy that he's very meticulous, and he knows exactly the message he wants to convey to people. And not only the media, when I ask a question, he's not just sharing a message with me, he's sharing a message with everyone else that's listening, including his players, everyone inside that locker room, the NCAA, the decision makers, all those people. So his voice is always going to be heard, and he knows exactly when and where to do it. So I've learned that about Coach Saban, but I've learned so much from him in that time. I've learned so many lessons from him, and, just feel very fortunate to have had the opportunity to interview him. And you mentioned the halftime interview. Yes, I've done a couple of those with him, quite a few actually. And, it is, I will tell you this, oftentimes Nick Saban, you'll find when they are blowing teams out, he's going to have more negative things to say or more pick aparts than if they're closer. So for some reason, Nick Saban tends to like it when they're closer, because I think he knows he can get his team in the locker room motivated to go back out there and make the adjustments that they need. So that's always interesting. And I laughed about this. I didn't get the opportunity. I did not have an Alabama game this year during the pandemic, but the real awkward 6-foot interviews we had to do. It was definitely a learning curve for a lot of people, especially in those first few games of the season. We were all trying to figure out, right? Because we're all like, okay, what's going on here? So it was almost like a 2-person press conference, and the coach runs up to the microphone at halftime. I've got my microphone in my hand, and at first it's like you're screaming at them and they can't hear you. The big board's going, noises everywhere, teams running in. They want to get in the locker room. That's all the coach wants to do. They don't really want to stop and talk to me, but hey, I got to do my job, right? And so I kind of joked early on. I was like, man, I feel sorry for the person that has to interview Nick Saban the first time, because he is a routine man. Like most coaches, they stick to a routine and they know exactly what's coming next. And all of a sudden you throw this monkey wrench in there, like this weird, crazy 6-foot apart interview during halftime where I can't hear anything that's going on. It's all chaotic. Kind of like deer in headlights, right? So I kind of joked and said, man, I feel sorry for the first person that has to do that. But the coaches got the hang of it. They figured it out, and things got a little bit less murky there as the season rolled on. So not too many awkward live TV moments, but I've had my fair share. So, you got to just be prepared for whatever comes your way.
Yeah, you talk about the adversity of this season with the pandemic. You would expect a program that, he's been there, 15, 16 years now. I think 06 is his first season in Tuscaloosa, but with what he's built and, his attention to detail, like you were talking about him being so meticulous, you would expect a program like that. Obviously, they're always in contention, but in a year like this, when there's so much adversity, then you expect them to handle it better than everybody else.
Yeah, definitely. Kind of played right into that narrative. Alabama obviously did have some of the resources and funding to be able to continue testing and to test every day, for COVID, which definitely I think helped with the numbers and certainly kept the contract tracing numbers down as well. But all that being said, they followed course, and, I think there were some issues here and there, just like anything else, a learning curve, trying to figure things out. But for the most part, I think that, Alabama did a great job of containing things the best that they could, and, certainly followed the protocols. And, I truly want to give a round of applause to every team that went out there and played this season. And of course the FCS teams that are playing right now, and really being able to achieve what they did during a pandemic. Kind of at first, I think the thought process was like, oh man, whoever wins the national championship, put an asterisk beside that, because, not all the teams are playing, not all the schools are playing, everyone's all over the place. Like, the competition's not as stiff. But when you think about all the other challenges and all the other distractions and everything that went into that 2020 season, put 20 asterisks beside it and say, this was the hardest season of the history of all seasons because of everything they had to overcome, So I think that, in many ways, it just kind of proves that, the cream of the crop will always rise to the top. And that's exactly what Alabama did. It'll be interesting to see how things shape up this year. I think we're trending in the right direction to be able to get back to some sort of normal football season. I know fans are excited to hear about that. So of course we'll be, crossing our fingers and praying that our nation restores itself and gets back to some sort of normal as we continue into the spring and into the summer and of course the fall.
Lastly, let's talk a little hoops very quickly on, Nate Oates, on the tremendous job that he's doing with that Alabama basketball program after doing an excellent job up at Buffalo.
Yeah. It's been a lot of fun getting to know Nate Oates. I had the opportunity to interview him, another one of our What Drives You series, Google that, last year. And, I laugh about this. We dive right into basketball. I get to know his life story. He shares a lot of great stuff, talks about his wife and, the cancer that she battled and how, she was able to overcome that, and, him standing beside her through that very tumultuous time in their lives. And, he kind of shared with us, took us sort of behind the scenes, pulled the curtain back into his life, into sort of what drives him. And I think one thing that was kind of interesting, kind of out of the gates, it's like, you're coming to a football school and there's a lot of expectations there. How are you going to compete with the guy that is right across the way in Bryant-Denny Stadium, i.e. Nick Saban? And, he embraced it. I'm learning from Nick Saban. I'm taking every bit of this in. And, oh, by the way, I love me some football. So let's talk some football first. So I think, he kind of won over the hearts of the Alabama fans pretty quickly. And the fact that, he loves football, he loves just athletics, and he loves, elite athletics, where you're putting the top talent out there to perform day in and day out. And so, make no mistake about it, he knew when he was coming to Alabama what he was in for. But I think it's just great to kind of see, just a very humble guy, humble leader, someone though that, wants to get the job done, doesn't care how high the expectations are. I'm going to put in the work and I'm going to get it done. I'm going to do it my way. And I think that was, the cool part. You saw a team, last year and especially into this year really take shape, and a very fast-paced team, a team that, has a lot of grit and grind, and has really peaked at the right time. And so it's been a lot of fun to see what he's been able to do with that program. Of course, Alabama clinching the SEC title, regular season title, first time, I guess, in like 19 years, I believe. Was it 19 years, 20 years? I have to look back at that. But, I think 1999 might've been the last time, or 1997. I don't know. Anyways, it's been a very, very, very long time. So, I think that things are on the up and up. I think it's exciting to see. And of course, again, last year we didn't have an SEC basketball tournament. We didn't have an NCAA basketball tournament. So it's kind of crazy. We're sitting here and it's been 2 years since we've seen postseason basketball, essentially. So I know we're all excited to see how things unfold. I'm certainly excited, and, may the best team win.
Not that he doesn't legitimately love football, because I'm sure he does, but then that was very smart to embrace it rather than running from it.
Very smart. Yes, absolutely. You got to know your place. And when you step foot on that campus in Tuscaloosa, exactly where your place is very quickly.
But other programs there in that general area, UAB, I believe, had an excellent season. And then you also had the interesting story with Bucky McMillan. He'd been a high school coach in Birmingham, moving to Sanford. Don't see that often. A high school guy getting a head Division I job without some Division I experience. But then, and then you also have the always exciting and interesting Bruce Pearl over on the.
Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah, always some great storylines here.
I see Bruce Pearl in the student section back in his Tennessee days with his shirt off, with his chest painted, just beating his chest.
Oh yeah, that's a sight to behold, for sure. But yeah, always some great storylines here. Bucky McMillan, great guy. Got to watch him, really grow that program over at Mountain Brook, and certainly fun to watch him at Sanford. And, Bruce Pearl, I know that obviously Auburn, had to take the penalty, or, the self-imposed postseason ban, which is unfortunate. But, I think, it's fun to see, basketball starting to at least take some headlines here in the state of Alabama, because we don't get to see it often. And so, I think it's exciting. It'll be fun to watch the SEC basketball tournament, see if Alabama can hold itself at the top. As I said, I think they've peaked at the right time, but they got to stay healthy, obviously, maintain that stamina, obviously go out there and play, their best basketball, and, see where the chips may fall as they get ready for the NCAA tournament.
Really appreciate your time. Appreciate you spending so much time with us this afternoon. And, for doing everything that you do to make a positive impact, and sharing your powerful story and your parents' journey.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. I appreciate it, Bubba. And thank you all so much for listening.
That concludes this edition of the Bubba Rose Show. We appreciate you tuning in. Be sure to subscribe, rate, and review the show wherever you listen. Also, be sure to follow us on social media at Bubba Rosenbaum on Twitter, at Bubba Rose Show on Instagram. Like and follow the Bubba Rose Show on Facebook, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Let us hear from you by emailing us at thebubbaroseshow@gmail.com. Again, that's thebubbaroseshow@gmail.com. We'll see you next time, y'all.